Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football. Today's show is presented by Geico. Switch to Geico. See all the ways that you could save. It is November 30th. That is 30 days have September, April, June, and November. Last day of November.
Yeah, it is. Wait, do you do that trick? I do the knuckle trick. Do you guys know the knuckle trick?
No, what's the knuckle trick?
This is riveting for those that are listening to the audio version, but you start on your knuckle here on your index finger.
Yep.
And you go January, February. You count each half knuckle. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. And the part that works is that, July and August both have 31 days. So you double count.
You go back on the other
this
side.
final knuckle. August, September, October, November, December. That's right. So if you're on a knuckle, 31. If you're off a knuckle, 30.
I've never heard that. That would have been so much easier as a kid.
Well,
30 days, that's embedded.
Island of Foster Moreau, knuckle trick. We all have our things that we know and don't know. Someone got really mad at me for not knowing about
the Island of Foster Moreau.
Who would that have been?
I will not name names, but yeah, I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't know that Foster Moreau existed prior to his fantasy football touchdown streak.
That's so good. I love that. All right, really quickly, we want to let everybody know, Kyle, who is normally here with us.
Kyle, who's normally here before us.
I'm nervous.
It's his first day I think I've ever seen Kyle be sick. Kyle is not here. He's not monitoring our chat today. So chat, if you want to throw some love, hit up at Kyle Soppe, ESPN, say get better. He's feeling fine. He's just a little bit under the weather. No big deal. Everything's going to be all right. But he's just not here today, and we never are without Kyle. He's like our saving grace every day.
I'm not going to be able to get any questions.
You guys know that Herm Edwards never missed a practice or a game during his NFL career?
I believe it. I believe it because I remember we used to do the draft in New York City. He would get up at 4:30 in the morning. I would be pulling all-nighters to do the injury stuff, but he try and go down to the gym for a break. He's on the treadmill at 4:30 in the morning. Good mood and all.
Different, yeah, of course. He's Herm. He's chipper all the time, but it's a different era, right? It's a much different era. I mean, even guys like, I laugh when I see some of these NBA practice or game reports where it's like, he woke up with a lower back stiffness because it's a back-to-back series and they just don't want to play the guy in the second night of a back-to-back, right? Different era.
Different era.
Kyle Soppe is our Herm Edwards. He doesn't miss time. Like, I will text Kyle. I'm not a night guy, but I will text Kyle at 5:15 in the morning because the baby's awake.
You get him in the morning, and I get him late at night.
Meanwhile, he'll respond within 30 seconds, and you're like, dude, this was totally hey, Kyle, no rush on this. I need it by 2024, but... Can you tell me this?
I got you.
Yeah.
And
immediately the 3 dots pop up within 10 seconds. It's like Kyle's already right back.
I'm like, dude, I need it by 2024.
That's fine.
I need this by the next lunar eclipse. Can I please deliver it to me? He's like, okay, I'll have it by 9. Does that work?
Is that all right?
I'm like, it's 8:57. Of course it works.
Like, I'm in the middle of surgery, but as soon as I get out, I promise I'll get those
open heart surgery, by the way. They told me to put my phone down, but the grind never stops.
We're going to talk about some news today. We got some miscellaneous fantasy that we're going to dump the bucket out on. We've got some news or noise, and then Liz Loza is going to join us as she always does on the Wednesday show. So, Stephania, let's start with some news where Aaron Rodgers says good news on testing, and he plans to play against the Bears. What's the good news? Is there more touchdowns left in that arm?
You really got to go to the Pat McAfee show to hear from Aaron Rodgers. That's what I've decided. Every week,
is the
I
place.
go in, that's where I go, and then I hear what he's saying to Pat McAfee because basically that's where he tells you everything that's going on. So let me share with you. I had to write some of the stuff down, but he basically said he got good news with the scans yesterday, so he plans on playing. He said, and I quote, earlier, he took a shot in the game that kind of rattled the rib cage. And originally, we'd heard that maybe it was an oblique. He said he tried to stretch it out at halftime, realized it probably wasn't muscular. And then he got hit again in third quarter hard, and he said he had a hard time breathing. And that was when he went back to the locker room. You saw him going back, and he wanted to get x-rays. And he referenced this, which is interesting. He said he prides himself on not coming out in games, but he was in, quote, considerable pain, felt like I couldn't move out there really much at all. And he referenced seeing Randall Cobb take a hit in the 2015 playoffs that left him with a punctured lung, and he thought it was scary. And so it does remind you that players see things, and that leaves an impression on them, and he didn't want to be in that situation where he was risking a punctured lung. And then he had a comment about the x-rays and the process and said he'd save that for after the season. I think where he might have been going with that is that a lot of times you can't see much on the x-ray, and you really need the subsequent imaging of a CAT scan the following day to basically see if there are any cracks in the ribs. But the bottom line is that Aaron Rodgers said he expects to play this weekend. So going from being concerned about a punctured lung to potentially playing this week.
Against the Bears.
I have nothing to add to that other than you should always check out the Pat McAfee show with the entire crew of legends, Boston Connor, Foxy, Tone Diggs. They're all hilarious. They have a really special thing going. We all admire their work ethic and their product and their ambitions. So shout out Pat McAfee show.
Do you have a favorite? Like, like I have to love Foxy because of the whole.
I was gonna say, like, Boston Connor and I are from, we're
fair.
from similar areas we're from the same state, about probably 30 or so minutes apart. So we're both dogs. So
love it.
Mullet, love the mullet.
Mullet. I got a chance to meet him at Colts training camp. So seeing Pat McAfee in his environment, in his element at the Colts. Yeah. I mean, and he's just like that all the time. By the way,
never turns it off.
The time.
Hey, congrats to Pat and his wife. They're going to be parents in March, I think I saw.
Freaking awesome, which is
Girl
great.
Dad Club, you're going to love it, Pat.
Going to love it. All right, let's talk one more player here, Stephania. Josh Jacobs hopes to play against the Chargers. I hope that he scores 40 fantasy points.
Can I start in? Yeah, I was saying, I hope this also happens. Now, Stephania, you can give your analysis.
Well, this takes me back to Sunday when we were talking about the fact that he had a calf strain and we were expressing concern about what kind of productivity he could put up because we said you never know. He was a late out on a Friday with a calf injury. You never know what could happen in a game, especially with a soft tissue injury. And guess what happened? He aggravated his calf during the game. You just wouldn't know it because he came out and hit that 86-yard touchdown in overtime in addition to everything else he did. But Tom Pelissero of NFL Network reported that he did aggravate it. So now they're going to keep him not doing much at all this week in the hopes that he plays. I think he's going to try and go. But again, we don't know how much worse it got.
If that's what he looks like,
I know,
on an 86-yard run with an aggravate,
that's what you look like when it's bothering you, but you're on adrenaline. You have a chance to do something big, and then you take a day later, and if you're limping around and it's a little bit worse, you certainly don't want to make it worse going. But there's no reason.
For me, it's 2 days later. Is that just because I'm old?
Well,
is that why?
When we first heard about it,
it was a day later. Okay.
Yeah. I texted Mike Clay and I asked him, Mike, can you give me a summation of your projections if Josh Jacobs does not practice in full any day this week versus if he does? And he said, quote, if he does practice in full, I have him projected for 49.3 points in the first half. If he does not practice in full, that number drops to 48.3 points in the first half.
That's fair. Limited. Limited. If he's limited, you got to obviously knock him down just a little bit.
It's the best matchup in the NFL, by the way. The Chargers are allowing more yards per carry than any team in the NFL. So the Chargers obviously really good offensively and defensively in a lot of ways as well. But their Achilles heel has been the run defense.
Don't say Achilles.
Ooh.
Josh Jacobs with a calf.
Sorry. Okay. Their weakness has been defending the run.
Yes. All right. Let's talk about some miscellaneous fantasy. We're dump out the bucket. This is a Wednesday, so we do rankings here on Wednesday, talking about the guys that we like. I want to talk about Ken Walker III.
Okay.
Ken Walker III has been inefficient and touchdown dependent, and I said it.
Okay.
Period. When you look at what he's done, last 2 games, 24 carries for 43 yards. 65.4% of his points as a rusher have come on touchdown runs. He has been uber efficient at finding ways to get in the end zone, and that is really tough to be able to continue to count on week after week. However, it's been happening. Yeah. And he is the guy within this offense. And so in spite of those inefficiencies, with who he is and with how often this offense is scoring points, I still love Ken Walker this week. Have him as running back 13. Field, you've got him at running back 13. Liz has him at running back 12. Here is my question for you. 7th round rookie Isaiah Pacheco just put up 15.6 fantasy points on this Rams defense. Is there a chance that Ken Walker III, in spite of the inefficiencies that he's had as a runner, can reach that 15.6 fantasy points? Yes or no, Field Yates?
Absolutely. I have him as RB13 on my board this week. I'm less concerned than you are about these past couple of weeks, Daniel, because here is how Kenneth Walker has performed in the 6 games that he has started for the Seattle Seahawks. 21 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. 23 carries for 167 yards and 2 touchdowns. 18 carries for 51 yards and a touchdown. 26 carries, 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. The past couple weeks have been bad, as you mentioned, 10 for 17 and then 14 for 26 with 2 touchdowns. But in that week in which he was inefficient as a runner, he had 8 targets. So,
yes, he did.
You know, I hear you that it has been less efficient and perhaps that is a little bit of a warning signal to some. I am going to dismiss those 2 games as much more the aberration than they are the expectation going forward. So I think Kenneth Walker has a really fine and dandy finish to the season. Oh, by the way, the Rams could be without Aaron Donald on Sunday.
15.6 fantasy points. You're taking the over on that.
I'm taking the over.
I'm going to take the over on it too. I also think that, Field, but I think it's worth mentioning that there have been some things the last couple games that have slowed him down a little bit.
He also is like a spectacular touchdown finisher. Like we're not quite on the level of Jonathan Taylor last year or Derrick Henry over like the past 4 years, but I think there is something to be said that like one of the better finishers in the NFL, and there's no other back on the roster that's a threat to take away goal line carries from Ken Walker.
Not even close. All right, Stephania, who do you want to talk about here?
Want to, or felt like I should?
Felt like you should.
Chase Claypool. Because I think this is interesting. We got excited maybe about the possibility that he was going to go to the Bears, maybe have an opportunity. He wasn't doing anything with the Steelers. We thought, well, maybe he'll get some opportunity there. We saw the Bears starting to open up their playbook. Really, as Justin Fields improved, we saw more opportunities for pass catchers in Chicago. But really, it was Darnell Mooney who was the big beneficiary. But now there's no more Darnell Mooney because Darnell Mooney is out. So does that mean more for Chase Claypool? Well, if you look at the game against the Jets, he had a couple catches for 51 yards, and that's the most yardage he's put up since he's been with Chicago. He led the receivers in targets with 5, but he only had 2 catches. But Cole Kmet, still the biggest most heavily targeted player, I should say, with 6 targets. So Cole Kmet, still a thing. Cole Kmet, to me, might be the favored receiver, whether it's Justin Fields that plays this weekend. We don't know if he's going to play. His shoulder, Matt Eberflus said he was unable to protect himself in the way that they wanted him to. He felt like he couldn't play and have the strength to do what he needed to do as a quarterback. We talked about that on Sunday. He has to be able to function safely and effectively in order to be out there. And when he can do that, he'll play. So it's possible he plays. So I don't really know what to do with Chase Claypool in the mix here. I think that he's not ranked for a reason because you can't really trust him. But I think he has an opportunity to perform better. And he might be just someone to keep an eye on or a deep stash because as you go into the playoffs, if it starts to become a thing, he might be somebody useful.
Chase Claypool, the trade is effectively a 2023 and beyond trade. Like the more and more I think about it and the more that we see out of this season, it's clear that the Bears have their vision set on 2023 and maybe 5 years after that of Chase Claypool. It's a second-round pick that could end up being one of the 5 or 6 top second-round picks in this year's draft order. So it's a premium price to pay. There aren't a lot of great free agent wide receivers next year. There aren't a lot of, and we'll see on the draft. You never know this far out, but the current wide receiver group does not stack up in the way that last year's and the year before's, and really the year before's draft class stacked up. So it was almost like the Bears are using their long-range lens to say that we got to get ourselves a guy who can maybe be the best available player amongst free agents this offseason. And it's less about what he does this year. So especially if, as Stephania said, there's no Justin Fields on Sunday, it really limits the value of Chase Claypool. So I do not have him ranked as well. I probably got a little bit ahead of myself in assuming he would have a more immediate impact in Chicago.
I think we all did. We all wanted.
But still, Darnell Mooney's gone.
I do think he's worth rostering. Like this is the thing.
Yeah, no problem with that.
Fine with having him at the end of your bench, especially because if Justin Fields comes back in non-Justin Fields games, it would be tough. But if Justin Fields comes back and you see a little bit of this chemistry begin to develop, I'd have to see. Like it would take some.
It's tricky. Here's the only reason. The only thing that I would push back on is that if you play through week 17, which most people do, a lot of people do, we have 5 weeks left. You're not starting him this week. The Bears are in a bye next week. So if he has a great game this week, then maybe you're getting 3 weeks of utility beyond the bye. But if he has a bad game this week, he has a bye next week, you're not starting him week 15. All of a sudden,
16,
it's like, all right,
17.
championship round. Am I playing Chase Claypool? I think it's fine to add and stash, but it would, absent a breakout performance this Sunday,
St. Brown type resurgence at the end of the year.
Then it's probably fine that if he goes quiet this week and you need a bench spot because there are 6 buys next week, you can drop Chase Claypool.
What about Kyren Williams? Field can
this
he
one's
exist?
on my mind. So yeah, it's an interesting one, Daniel, because I think what's clear is that Adam Schefter's intuition and information on the Rams' interest in making him their guy was accurate, right? Since he came back from that high ankle sprain, his role has grown and grown and grown. The Rams offense is just a complete shell of itself, and it certainly sounds like that could be the case for the rest of the season. They've been non-committal on Cooper Kupp. They've been non-committal on Matthew Stafford. Allen Robinson was placed on IR yesterday. All things that make this offense less explosive, on top of the fact that the Rams have started the different offensive line combination in every game this year. Every single one. Not by design, by injury and other necessities. So here's what did stand out to me from Kyren Williams' performance this past week is that he played 39 snaps to 16 for Cam Akers.
Mm-hmm.
That role is already good. If it continues to grow in terms of snap percentage, that's very valuable. He ran 20 routes, just 5 for Cam Akers, and he had 14 total touches for 60 yards as opposed to 8 for 37 for Cam Akers. So it's clear which one's more valuable, right? It's clear which one has some passing game upside. Kyren Williams not just good as a pass catcher, awesome as a pass protector as well, which is another way to keep yourself on the field. The limiting factors here for Kyren Williams are fairly straightforward. How much rushing production will there be, and will he score any touchdowns? Because they're so bad on offense right now. It's going to be a tougher sled. That being said, who do they play this week? They play the Seattle Seahawks, who just surrendered 303 total yards to Josh Jacobs, which is why Kyren Williams is running back 26 on my board this week.
Make a lot of good points, Field. I don't feel super great about it because I haven't seen a whole lot, but the matchup is fantastic, and you look at the numbers, like they're obviously utilizing him from that standpoint. Chris Godwin.
Right back to me. Yeah,
that's
so
you
I'll take
too?
this one. This is me as well.
Holy cow.
So this, if I had told you this, I don't think you'd believe it. But did you know, so Chris Godwin comes out in week 1, probably played too soon or at least too much in week 1, bangs up the hammy right away.
Yep.
Misses 2 games. Since week 4, in the exact same number of games, he has the exact same number of targets and catches as Stephon Diggs.
Wow, I would not have guessed that.
You would not have guessed that,
No
right?
way.
And you're like, Stephon Diggs is one of the, the 5 most valuable fantasy wide receivers right now. The big difference is that Chris Godwin was not scoring touchdowns until recently, as he has scored now in back-to-back games. So sort of my hypothesis here on Chris Godwin is that, remember coming into this season, it was you might be getting a top 8 or so wide receiver at like wide receiver 24 or 25. Let's assume that Chris Godwin has normal luck going forward with touchdowns. There are 6 games left. I'm not saying he scores every game, but I'm also thinking over the next 6 games, it would be reasonable to expect 3 touchdowns.
That's
right.
fair.
Half a game.
And, if you think back to last year, Chris Godwin really started off the year as Brady's preferred target.
Yeah.
Mike
He was the
Evans,
whole year.
he was the preferred target until he got hurt.
By far.
By far.
In terms of targets.
And I think now, as he
Reception.
starts to get back, the Mike Evans thing is not there. That's not working.
Yeah, they've
So
been
to
talking
me,
about it.
this is Brady and Godwin. Who's he going to trust the most there is Chris Godwin. So it makes sense to me that as Chris Godwin's get more confidence and he's playing better and he's healthier, that is naturally going to fit.
So I'm highest on Godwin amongst our rankers this week at wide receiver 14. Not so far ahead of the curve, but still a little bit. And my thought is that not only has he registered touchdowns in back-to-back games, so he's proving that he's not allergic to the end zone. Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Evans on Monday night. We've talked about that plenty of times on this podcast. And the only reason why I don't have Godwin ranked higher is, there are 2 reasons. One is that Brady just, for whatever reason, finishing drives hasn't been nearly the player he was last year. Maybe that's more systematic. Maybe that's more the entire offense is dealing with that. And then 2 is Godwin's yards per catch is down. Now, I don't think that's because Chris Godwin's lack of explosiveness or anything like that. He looks kind of like Chris Godwin. I think it's because the offensive line's so banged up. They have to get the ball out quick.
Yeah.
They're so banged up. And by the way, Tristan Wirf's now out for 3 to 4 weeks. He's their all-pro right tackle.
That's going to be huge.
So anyways, this is a long-winded way of saying that, your patience paid off with Chris Godwin.
Yep.
I know the touchdowns, obviously you'd love to have those. But even when he wasn't scoring touchdowns, he was getting you 12 to 14 points per game with the kind of volume that he's seeing right now. Stephon Diggs volume.
Yeah.
Right? You're thinking to yourself, you might have a top 10 or 12 wide receiver every single week if he just gets normal touchdown luck. Again, he might, of the remaining 6 games, if he scores 3 touchdowns, which I would consider normal, 9 touchdowns per year for Chris Godwin seems a reasonable ask, half a game. That to me represents a top 12 or so wide receiver.
Boy, I would love that because I have so much Chris Godwin.
And we all,
So
we
that
all
would
did,
be
'cause
great.
every week I'm like, oh yeah, Chris, got to plug him in, right?
Right.
Mike's projections do like him for good reasons.
Love
He's
him
getting
for good
insane
reasons.
volume.
Well, I want to talk about a wide receiver as well because I love revenge games, guys.
Ooh, do you?
Let's just talk about this. A.J. Brown with the Philadelphia Eagles coming on to take on the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
Do you remember how this one ended?
No, tell me how this one ended.
A.J. Brown was not happy. There was some subtweeting.
I don't remember.
There was some
I don't remember that.
I
referencing.
remember all that.
Yeah, so this is, and I should have probably refreshed myself on all the specifics, but I think A.J. Brown and the Titans obviously no team ever talks about contracts publicly and never puts a player out publicly about his contract. But it seems like A.J. Brown believed some were creating the perception that he had I think it was they weren't offering him anywhere near a respectful enough number. And it was almost like the choice was made by them that this had to happen, right? So I think he was a little bit less than thrilled with the way that things concluded in Tennessee. Obviously, he's very happy in Philadelphia as he has been super productive. Last I checked, they're 10-1.
And they're winning. Yeah.
They are.
And
Titans
he's doing all right.
and for the Titans, for their matter, by hook or by crook, they're right there back in the mix, right? They're atop their division. It's not a great division, obviously, but still, they are atop their division.
Different offense.
They sure are. So, revenge game is definitely on tap.
Here's a question. It's just fun. I just want to ask the question. Each of the last 2 weeks, the Tennessee Titans have given up at least 20 fantasy points to the wide receiver one of the other team in this revenge game for A.J. Brown and how he feels against the Titans. You think he gets to 20 points? You're not Mike Clay. I'm not saying you need to be Mike Clay with projections. I'm just asking.
Well, first of all, Mike Clay would like to be me as a projections. All right, Mike, you out there listening? Probably
Mike
not. Mike's probably
Probably
doing
not.
projections right now.
He apparently doesn't think so because it's only got him for 15.46
Why does
points.
Mike hate everybody?
And why does it have to be 2 decimal points, by the way?
That's a great question.
I would love to
15.5. Come on, Mike.
if you were to imagine the most valuable things that could be stolen within our country right now. There's probably a ruby somewhere
Mike
that's
Clay's
worth like 50
laptop.
million, right? There's probably someone who's Mike Clay's laptop
Is one of them.
There's a subsequent do you guys ever watch National Treasure?
Of course,
Nick
one of my
Cage
favorite
movie?
movies.
National Treasure 3. Mike Clay's computer gets stolen and
Stop
Nick Cage
it.
miraculously discovers it somewhere.
Oh my gosh, I would freaking love that.
Be a great
That would
movie,
be.
wouldn't
I
it?
love the National Treasure movies. They're just like adventure movies for adults.
Totally. They're like good, clean fun, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mike Clay's computer being stolen. Meanwhile, Mike is somewhere right now, sprinting
You guys are dorks.
to a security store. I mean,
Now,
duh.
come on, Stephania.
Hold on. We're dorks. Mike is a dork, though, right? Mike's
He's the
computer
king of dorks.
has, yes. And by the way, we love Mike. And he would tell you the
course.
first thing, right? But
Do you think Kyle's ever seen National Treasure?
Kyle's never
doesn't
seen
watch
Good Morning
movies.
America.
Kyle doesn't watch movies.
Kyle's never seen SportsCenter.
He had
Kyle's
never
like,
seen
what's
Star
TV?
Wars
Yeah.
until we gave him
I
the
know we made him.
assignment.
Matthew made him do the
Well, it was company, to be fair.
Well, that's fair.
Company obligation, but
I think
so.
we should do a National Treasure date night, our entire fantasy focus crew, just as an adult crew. Make sure
No.
Kyle gets to have some, and maybe we can come up with some good Mike Clay hijinks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, see, I'm onto it.
Nothing
You
wrong
guys
with that.
like-
The
You guys
answer
idea
on
of
I'm gonna go with
date night, mine
I'm gonna go
is
with no on the
You're gonna go
20
no on the 20. I know that's a big number, but it's just revenge game. I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
By the way, you remember when Traylon Burks was drafted to be A.J. Brown?
Hey, he's coming on.
Hey, he was
coming
hurt.
on.
It took a little bit,
Back
but these last
off.
couple
He
weeks
was
have
been better.
Whoa! I didn't even get to finish my
I
sentence.
know,
I
but
just
it's
said.
not fair to put that on him.
it's taken
just
a while.
youngster who got hurt.
All right, let's talk about the next guy here. Kadarius Toney, Stephania Bell.
Yeah, and this is less about Kadarius Toney and more about what do you do with the Chiefs wide receivers. And a little bit about Kadarius Toney. You know how many games has he played this year, guys?
I'm going with 2.
6? I don't know.
It tells you have no idea how many he's played. He's played 5. And
5,
2
hey.
games have been with, I know, 5.
I was way off.
2 is with the Chiefs.
Oh, okay.
And really one and a
half, right?
half if
Yeah.
you go one game and then the one where he got hurt. So, and all to do with injuries and hamstring injuries in particular. And when he came over to the Chiefs, there was a lot of concern about this chronic hamstring injury situation that he found himself in. And then he had that first game and everyone was like, oh, can't believe the Giants let him go. And then he had the second game where he left and everybody was like, oh, that's
Oh,
what
he still
happened.
has
That's why.
hamstring
Okay,
issues.
so let's talk about, since it's not clear how long he's going to be out. He didn't practice at all last week. We don't know if we're going to get him back this week. Mecole Hardman on injured reserve with an abdominal injury.
Yep.
Juju had a concussion, missed a week, but he came back last week.
Yep.
Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Justin Watson, Sky Moore. How do you value all these? Typically 1 to 3 catches per player. Sky Moore actually led the team last week with 5 catches. Was also being used on punt returns. That's not going to happen again after he fumbled on
Third
the
time.
punt return last. Yeah. That's
time
not
to
going
move
to
on.
happen again. So stick with wide receiver.
Yeah.
But so we don't know if you get Kadarius Toney back in the mix, how are you as a fantasy manager looking at these Chiefs wide receivers? But I think this is really tough. You've got a high-powered offense. You know somebody's going to get points. It's critical fantasy matchup weeks. I don't have a great answer. I would be hard-pressed to trust Kadarius Toney based on history.
Yeah.
And I don't know
think
where
the
I'm
answer-
leaning because they've all looked good at different points in time.
Yes, I'm leaning toward Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
Well,
no, I mean funny, right? Like,
right. No,
well,
but
yeah,
he
that's-
is the number
it's
one pass
amazing that,
catcher on
like-
their team, without a doubt.
Yeah, and Patrick Mahomes leads the NFL in passing yards, and yet we're like, who do you play besides Travis Kelce? I think it's probably been borne out. Like, it's Juju is like a top 25-ish receiver. MVS is like a top 35-ish wide receiver, and then everybody else is, if you guess, you're guessing right.
And even Juju, I don't want to say is a dart throw, but there's a lot of fluidity within that ranking.
Well, he was not playing the same snap allotment last week. His first game back from a concussion, which you would think is more condition. It's not like they're going to play him out there if he's half concussed, right? Like it's probably
it's
more like
probably conditioning and just planning.
Yeah.
But it's just hard to trust any particular pass catcher. And if I am somebody who has Kadarius Toney, I would be hard pressed to trust him in the first game back. And I'm not saying that this week will even be the first game back. I don't know what they're going to get out of him.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'd want to see it for a couple weeks before I put in my fantasy lineup.
It's just
especially
a shame
with where
though,
we're at.
because you're looking for fantasy points. You go to the high-powered offenses. That's how you play this game. You look for who's going to catch the
guy
ball.
with a ton of skill and upside. Supposedly, you just can't stay healthy and be on the field. So frustrating.
So frustrating.
All right, let's talk about the Jets' backfield field.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring this up because I feel like maybe we've underplayed it the past couple of days. Those out there who aren't aware, Michael Carter left the game early for the Jets this past Sunday. It's a low ankle sprain, according to Robert Saleh. He's not been ruled out for Sunday against the Vikings, but there's at least a possibility he won't play. And James Robinson has been benched.
Jonathan Taylor,
exactly.
You don't always come back right away from those. They're real injuries.
And so on Sunday, James Robinson was benched. He was a healthy scratch, and I'm not positive that changes. And if it does, it's not like I expect him to have a big role on Sunday. And Ty Johnson might have a decent role. But more importantly, Zonovan, we call him Bam Knight, former NC State standout, I think has a chance to be the lead back in this Jets backfield on Sunday. And guy who just was like all sorts of explosive in college. There are a million good college running backs, which makes it so hard to evaluate like whether you should pay a premium pick on them or not. But he played 30 snaps this past week. He had 17 touches. He had 103 yards. The most productive passing game back, I think, this Sunday, if Michael Carter is out, could well be Ty Johnson. It's a good fit with what he has done well in his college and pro career. But I still want to leave out Zonovan Knight, whose value I think would creep up into like a top 25-ish play if we got clarity that there is no Michael Carter on Sunday. Passed the eye test to me, and Robert Saleh was raving about him after the game, like talking about how much of a spark he provided for that Jets offense. And clearly they saw something in him before the injury to Michael Carter, because they played him over James Robinson. So while I don't know if they expected 103 yards, they expected something from him if he got opportunities, and he certainly made them look smart this past Sunday.
Heck yeah, 17 touches. Like that's
legit, right?
That's legit. That's a lot of volume here for him. So I'm really interested, like you're saying, Field, especially with no Michael Carter, to see how this backfield works out here this week. I want to talk about Christian Kirk. You want to know why? I'll tell you why. It's because you guys talk about the Detroit Lions so much. I'm not going to let you hurt me anymore. I'm going to own this. Christian Kirk. All right, here we go. In 11 games this season, 12 times has a wide receiver scored 18 or more fantasy points against the Detroit Lions. So that means more than once per game, right? There's at least 2 wide receivers that scored at least 18 fantasy points against the Detroit Lions. 8 times has a wide receiver hit 21 or more fantasy points. Enter Christian Kirk and this offense. I think that Christian Kirk is going to reach this number. That 12 other wide receivers has hit in 18 fantasy points. I don't know what Mike Clay is thinking. I don't know what Mike Clay's rankings are. I don't know why he hates Christian Kirk this week. I've got
him very personal.
It is very. I think it probably is. I've got Christian Kirk at wide receiver 10. Mike has him at 15.6 fantasy points. I think to go along with this streak, Christian Kirk scores over 18 fantasy points this week.
Wow, interesting. So the only reason why it's interesting to me is you just brought up Zay Jones not that long ago.
I know.
So are you all in? Like, are you?
You basically everybody gets touchdowns.
I know
in this
what
game?
it is.
I'll tell you what.
He's trying to reverse jinx it.
Yeah.
What can I say, guys? I got some stuff. We'll save. I got some things I want to say on Zay Jones. We're going to save it. We got news or noise coming up here in just a little bit. So we'll talk about that in a second.
All right.
But at least one of these Jaguars wide receivers is going to score 18 fantasy points. Do you think if you were going to choose one of them?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you're projecting it. If you're going to choose one.
Yeah, Christian Kirk.
Christian
Or Zay Jones. Yeah.
By the way, so Lions, Jaguars on Sunday.
What's the over-under on that game?
A lot, probably.
It's like 52.
Here's a fun fact for you guys. I play in a fantasy league.
That's cool.
You
That is
do
fun.
you?
That is a good fun
Just
fact.
one. That's
Phil.
my fun fact.
that
That's
fun?
cool.
With 9 esteemed NFL mascots. You guys know Blue.
Yeah, of course I
Yeah.
know Blue.
Colts mascot, friend of the program, friend of all of us. Just real friend, real life friend. Great guy, all-time great guy. He wanted to get together and make a league. And so there's 12 of us, excuse me, not 10.
So
no,
it's
there's
a
10.
bunch of mascots and you?
Yes.
Oh, this is fascinating.
It's really fun.
I am now really
it's
interested
fun.
in this league.
And who did I play this past Sunday? Jackson DeVille.
Oh, nice.
Was he wearing a Speedo?
Well, I don't know that I'm at liberty to describe exactly. I'm not sure I'm allowed to
have you all
reveal
seen
why
this?
how this all
I'm
came
not sure I
yes.
need to know the answer to that question. I don't know.
I finally
you
had to-
have to have seen this.
Okay.
The meme.
If you haven't seen it yet,
you have to go look.
just use the internet for 5 seconds. You'll find it. But yeah, I did ask him the why behind the quite scandalous attire that he was rocking on Sunday. And I'm not sure I'm allowed to reveal this. I'll ask him later off camera if I'm allowed to express or allowed to share the story behind why. But yeah, this league, it's hilarious, right?
Wait, when you drafted,
Yeah.
did they come as a mascot?
No, we had to do, unfortunately. So here's the funny
shoot.
part is that this kind of came together a little bit late in the preseason. And obviously they're from all over the country. We have Toro, who's the Rams mascot, all the way to, I guess, Jacksonville.
Sourdough Sam in it?
Sourdough Sam is not. Nope. We've got Toro.
Sorry,
We've
fine.
got Blue.
Yeah,
we've got
rage.
Miles. We've got Jackson DeVille. We got Freddie Falcon. We've got Victor the Viking. We've got. Did I say Toro already?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I said Toro.
What about the wolf from Kansas City?
We don't have the Casey Wolf. No. Gosh, who else? This is so bad. Rampage. I said Rampage. He's Rams. He's
There you
Rams.
go.
Toro
Yeah.
is the Texans.
We're
Sorry,
putting you on the
error
spot
there.
here in a
Yeah,
live
yeah,
That's a
environment.
lot.
Blitz, Seahawks mascot. Excuse me. Who else? I'm.
Okay.
Do they make you dress up
Bottom
in
line.
something?
Yes, I have to. Yeah, so after if I lose a matchup, I have to wear that team.
Wear
No,
the-
God, Sir Purr's in there as well. Sir
Oh,
Purr's
Sir Purr,
hilarious.
of course.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyways, it's a great league. It's really fun and funny as well. So, I played Jackson DeVille on Sunday, and I
There's
was
so many
nervous about
questions.
saying anything because, like, if you lose and he wore his birthday suit to work, what's he gonna make me do if I lose? to him?
That's a great question.
I definitely want to know what the league punishments are. I have so many questions about this
Yeah.
league. We'll have to continue. We have to find a way to do something with this league.
Oh, totally. They're
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, they're
Yeah.
all great.
But
They all
for the
love it,
pod,
and they're all
we have to
very fun.
find some way to do something
For the game,
pod.
over-under is 51.5 for this Lions
I
Jaguars
said
game.
52.
So
Do
you
you
were
live
off.
in Vegas? Are you Deborah Kazarian?
Deborah.
I don't know. That was,
Like,
Doug
is
Deborah
kinda
has a
old
female name
name?
begins. What would you prefer? What would you prefer instead? Darlene. Darlene. Doris.
Oh my God! What do you think? I was born in the 50s?
I don't know.
Field, stop it!
Sorry.
Wait while you're ahead.
What would you prefer? It's a female name that begins with a D because Doug D.
yeah, probably Donna. No?
Stop.
Okay.
Donna. Yeah.
Hey, let's talk about Raheem Mostert, Stephania.
gosh.
You're taking on the San Francisco 49ers. I love revenge games almost as much as you love revenge games.
I'm still stuck on these 1950s names. Yeah, Raheem
Dolores.
That's
Mostert.
it.
You need to quit
Okay.
now. How about Danny? Danny, California.
Yeah, we
Oh,
can
it's
do
a good
that.
one.
We can
Yeah.
do that. We can do
Great
that.
album.
Yep.
Great album.
Now you would have impressed me if
RHCP,
you'd gone
right?
there. Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
Duh.
Duh.
Look at this. We're all
the-
Sorry. No big deal.
You're the
music. I'm
music
me, the music aficionado
I know.
here, right?
Okay.
Like I can
Proud of
sing
you.
happy birthday. Thank you.
Talk to me after. You have demerits for your DNA. Okay,
That's
Raheem
5
Mostert.
points from
Let's go
Gryffindor.
back to California.
Yeah.
Raheem Mostert back in the San Francisco days. Now plays for the Miami Dolphins, and guess who's going back to San Francisco this week with the Miami Dolphins? And Raheem Mostert, I wanted to bring this up because he has struggled with a knee issue of late, and we've seen a lot of Jeff Wilson Jr., also former 49er. And so the question for fantasy managers has been, if you've held on to him, what do you do? Is this a complete role change? Is there still a role for Raheem Mostert? And I say there's a sneaky role for him this week because Raheem Mostert really, really wants to play in this game. The knee that's been bothering him, my understanding is it's not the knee that he had surgically repaired in the summer. He's actually done very, very well with that, despite the heavy workload that he had early in the year. And if nothing goes sideways in practice this week, I fully expect him to play and be very heavily involved is not what I want to say, but have a decent role in this week's game. Unfortunately, the problem for fantasy is that you're going to split the difference between him and Jeff Wilson Jr. You're probably not going to have a clear leader there. But I think if anybody can have a big upside day, potentially even against the stalwart Niners defense. I mean, if anybody knows how to play the Niners defense, it's Mike McDaniel, Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr.
Yeah.
So
she's doing the same thing as
she
you.
is. She is.
Reverse jinxing, right? The two of you.
You talk it into existence. No big deal.
I think Raheem Mostert could have he could have a decent day, but more importantly, don't write him off for the year. I definitely think he's back in the mix, and maybe doesn't have the, he's not going to be as valuable as he was in the start of the season when he was clearly outpacing Chase Edmonds, who just wasn't a fit for that offense. But I think he has a bigger role. I would not be writing him off.
I'm just trying to think, who am I playing against? So, Justin Jefferson, the Vikings play the Jets. If he could have a big day on Sunday. Just going for the reverse.
Just going for the reverse jinx against this. I think with Raheem Mostert, you still have to roster because if anything happens to Jeff Wilson Jr., he's going to be that guy. It's going to be tough for me to start him if I know that Jeff Wilson Jr. isn't hurt.
Yeah,
because
I'm in the same boat.
But he is a guy that is still going to be utilized within this offense. For fantasy, it would be tough for me without Jeff Wilson Jr. though.
Yep, tough matchup in the split backfield. I do lean towards Jeff Wilson Jr.
But all
as
the
well.
things you're saying, I totally agree with Stephania.
You may be in a situation where you might need to.
That's right.
And next week when everybody's on bye, he's somebody to consider.
16-team leagues warp our brains.
Oh gosh,
because I play in 2, maybe 3 16-team leagues, and it's like, yeah, like you're laughing at me for starting Raheem Mostert. I'm like, dude, I'm starting Giovanni Bernard, who played. He didn't even play a snap last week, so don't laugh at my Raheem Mostert start, right? Meanwhile, in a 10-team league, it's like, yeah, so I'm choosing between Josh Jacobs and
Joe Mixon.
It's like really tough. So I don't really know which way to go. Like,
you gotta start playing more 10-team leagues.
But I think you have to be looking for the guys who maybe people have overlooked or they've dropped recently, or somebody who might be able to give you a spark somewhere when all else fails.
All right. That's it for our dumping out the bucket for our rankings field. Do you want to pay some bills for us? Is that a thing that's going on?
Well, Daniel, you just asked me a question. Geico asked this question. How would you love a chance to save some money on insurance?
I'm so glad you asked. I would love that field.
Duh, you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage, plus add an easy-to-use Geico mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more. Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Extra, news or noise? Loud noises!
Who thought of this segment back in the day?
I love the drop.
It's always so good.
So good.
It's
Did you
never
think of
not
this
good.
segment back in the day?
I think
you
came
and
up
I
with
knocked
it.
our heads together,
Yeah.
not in a way that would be dangerous, and we said, let's call something called news or noise.
And then I think somebody pilfered
Yeah,
it.
maybe, possibly. I won't name any names. My favorite Friends character is Matthew Perry. Actually, no, he was my least favorite Friends character. I don't know
He
why
really
I thought
was.
of that, but apropos of nothing, he was my least favorite character.
A little bit of news or noise here for you today, week 13. Let's jump into this really quickly. Zay Jones crushed it last week. Field Yates, 11 catches for 145 yards. News or noise on this Zay Jones performance and whether or not he's going to continue to smash against the Lions
Well,
this
I like
week.
him enough this week. I've got him as wide receiver 32 on my board. It is a good matchup, as we all know. We've talked about the Lions cornerbacks a million times this season. I think the tricky part with Zay Jones is that it's hard to figure out when he's going to have a really, really busy week. So I will call it somewhere in between, but I will call it noise.
Noise, okay.
Because I think if you're expecting something like 10 or 11 targets and he's been up over double-digit targets in back-to-back games, I don't know that that's a guarantee. He has 5 games this season with at least 8 targets, and he has 4 games this season with 5 or fewer targets. So nearly a 50-50 proposition whether he's getting strong volume or not nearly enough given the touchdown production for him this season to have him as a lineup lock. I kind of like all the Jaguars pass catchers this week because there is a chance this is a shootout game against the Lions. So this is more noise than news for me.
I think we know who Zay Jones is, too. Like, this is part of his game, right? There are some ups and downs here based on what the defense is going to give the Jaguars. So there are games where you have Zay Jones games and then games where, like you said,
there are a few
don't.
offenses, and it's certainly not the Chiefs in terms of level of production. They don't have a Travis Kelce, but as we know with the Chiefs wide receivers, it's hard to figure out which one's going to be busy on a given Sunday, but you can reasonably expect that at least one of them will be busy on a given Sunday.
Also, they love him.
They do.
I mean, as far back as training camp, the wide receivers coach was talking about how great Zay Jones is. So I think, based on performance, there might be a little boost, a little lean towards Zay Jones.
Stephania, speaking of performance, Mike White scored almost 25 fantasy points last week. News or noise on Mike White legitimately being a fantasy contributor at the quarterback position?
Well, the way it was framed on our sheet was, can he be? And I think, yes, he can be. That's the news. I mean, he showed us this week with over 300 passing yards and a couple of touchdowns, and they are playing Minnesota. Minnesota is a team that gives up the 6th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. It's going to be a high-scoring affair, most likely, because Minnesota is going to put points on the board, so they are going to have to respond. The question is, will he be? I see that you got where you guys have him ranked, and we've talked about with quarterbacks, it's all relative to who your other options are. So if you've got one of your key top 10 starters, you're not necessarily starting him. But in a 2-quarterback league, I think he's certainly viable. If you have a sudden need to replace a quarterback, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to play, so I don't think you're going to have to replace Aaron Rodgers, but it's a possibility. I would certainly consider it. He proved he can do it.
Only 2 teams on a bye this week. Fields
laughing.
So
No. I'm not laughing. I'm not disagreeing with Stephania. Like someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
Someone's going to start Mike White this week and be rewarded for that audacity, because it's a very good matchup, and the Jets have plenty of pass catchers that are really useful players.
You know who might do it?
You?
Somebody who had Russell Wilson
Yeah.
as a starting quarterback, then replaced him with Andy Dalton,
Yeah.
which worked out for a while.
Yeah, you might do it. You should do it this week.
Maybe Mike White
That's
is
a good scenario.
quarterback
Now, that's
in that
obviously
scenario.
a 15. It's a 16-team
Right.
league, so it's a little
Right.
bit different. Here's what I will say, and I'm not here to defend Zach Wilson, because obviously it was time for a change from the Jets. I will say this though, that could there have been a better matchup for Mike White to take over as the starter in?
Yeah.
Zach Wilson's last 4 games, it was the Broncos, the Patriots twice, and the Bills. And then Mike White shows up and gets the Bears, who have their 2 best players on defense that are still there.
And they lose a couple more during the game. I get it.
But it's a good matchup this week with Buffalo hovering next week. So this may be a 1-week experiment, Stephania, but under those circumstances, it would be newsworthy.
And it would be newsworthy for this week, especially when you're at a point where every single game matters.
Mm-hmm.
Every single game matters.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about A.J. Dillon here. Can A.J. Dillon repeat what happened last week? Here's the thing, really quickly. 11 touches for 88 yards and a touchdown. It was his first touchdown since week 1. It was his first week having double-digit fantasy points since week 1. I think this is more noise to me than it is news.
Moving along. That's exactly right, Dick. I mean, what else do you need to hear besides the fact that he hasn't scored since week 1? So at an 11-week gap, generally speaking, like my players to score more than once every 11 weeks.
Should Dalvin Cook managers be concerned, Field Yates?
It's a tricky one, Daniel, because if you go back and look at his last 4 games, he has over 14 fantasy points just once. And when did that 14-point fantasy effort come? Against the Bills. And that game against the Bills, he had an 81-yard touchdown rush. Now, to be clear, those count, right? They certainly do. If you took away every player's biggest rush every single week, it'd be a much different game that we are playing. That being said, he was largely contained in that game. But the matchups have been pretty tricky recently, right? As we just talked about with Zach Wilson and some of his matchups. Last week, Dalvin Cook played against the Patriots, who've allowed 2 rushing touchdowns the entire season. They've been a really, really stingy defense to opposing fantasy running backs throughout the year. So I think it's noise in this regard. He's still a top 12 play for me this week. Running back's a really difficult position to find players, especially with some question marks this week, like Najee Harris, even the 49ers, who we'll talk about more in just a second. So it's noise, but I feel you if you're a Dalvin Cook manager, because I've needed Dalvin Cook to come through more over the past month.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to add. It's just you want to have more. Dalvin Cook is really good at football, and you're going to keep starting him because of who he is.
Yeah.
That's really it. Stephania, speaking of starting, guys, Christian McCaffrey. Yeah. Boy, here's the thing. Christian McCaffrey has not been heavily utilized in the ground game in San Francisco, but there have been some injuries here with these running backs. News or noise on the fact that CMC not getting a ton of work on the ground game here in San Francisco?
Well, it's legitimate news because there is an injury concern with him. So in that regard, yes, you're watching the injury reports. You want to make sure that he actually plays in this game. Now, I fully expect him to. I think this is, he's dealing with some tendonitis and knee. Load management, as Field is saying. I think the load management will come in the form of the practice reps this week. I think the anticipation is that he will play. But the question is, how will he be utilized? And it may be, to your point, Daniel, more in the receiving game. They may split up the carries on the ground with a whole variety of players, because Wilson Jr. is now going to be playing for the team that's coming to visit them, along with Raheem Mostert.
Yep.
And they may be using a mix of Tyrion Davis-Price and Jordan Mason. So
a little more Debo, maybe.
Yeah, and Debo back to being a wide back, maybe, because of Christian McCaffrey's. So that part is news in terms of how it's going to roll out. Here's the thing that's not going to change. You're going to start him.
Yep.
You're going to start him.
Yep.
Yeah, that was when the trade went down, my take was he's still an RB1. It's just that the days of him being ranked 1 or 2 on our board every single week, probably not nearly as likely. He's going to go down to like 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8, depending on the matchup and his health, and that's where we're at with Christian McCaffrey. He's still a bona fide super duper star, but if you were I know we do this all the time, but if you were to do the final 6 weeks of the season, the number 1 player in fantasy, Austin Eckler, right? I don't know if CMC goes 3, 5, 7, but probably somewhere in that range as opposed to number 1.
Probably we'll have some games where he could be 1 or 2, and games where he'll be like 8 to 10.
Yep.
That's how it goes.
That's how it works, especially when you have so many different options within this offense. All right, that is news or noise. And now, it's the best time of the year. Did you guys know that? Football season is in full swing. Basketball and hockey have returned, and nothing beats seeing your favorite team live. Make up for lost time and go out and enjoy a game. Vivid Seats, the official ticketing partner of ESPN, is offering you $10 off your first $100 ticket purchase with code FFF. That's code FFF. Download the app or visit vividseats.com today. Vivid Seats, life happens live. Liz Loza also happens live as we welcome in Liz. Liz, it's so great to see your face. I love being able to have you on these Wednesday shows. I love doing the Sunday show with you as well. It's just super fun to be able to have you here to chat with us. Actually, it's just me. It's not really us. And I want to ask you a question on my note, Liz Loza. Oh my gosh, I just looked down at the screen and you have an awesome Pokemon sweater on. That is an awesome shirt. I just want to say that right now. Shout out to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's bring some electric type energy to a little playoff run for a lot of managers, right?
I see what you just did there. All right. So let's talk about the Loza Blocking Metric, because I see a whole big thing about the Loza Blocking Metric on our page here today, Liz. Why don't you go ahead and break down part of what this is?
Well, it's a blend of statistics that both Kyle Soppe and I kind of came up with. I feel like the trenches get ignored a lot in football in general, not just fantasy football, and the efficiency, as we've certainly seen with the Colts, right? That's like a prime example of the offensive line is really key to discovering whether or not, particularly in various matchups, when we face, defensive line units, whether or not players can be effective. And so we kind of brainstormed a bunch of statistics that we thought might uncover efficiencies or deficiencies in both defensive lines and offensive lines, both pass blocking and pass rushing, and then run defending and run blocking. And we've been calling it the Loza Blocking Metric for pass blocking and pass rushing. There are 4 different metrics for the rushing component, and there are 7 for the running component. So it's just like, it's a little chemistry experiment.
It's just a chemistry experiment. No big deal. All right. So with all of this that you and Kyle have put together, and we said Kyle, unfortunately not here today, but probably the smartest person we have on the show. When we talk about this Loza Blocking Metric, Liz, I want to ask you about a few players and how it might apply to them in this week's matchups. Let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa taking on the San Francisco 49ers this week. What does the LBM have to say about Tua?
Well, Tua presents with the 7th worst matchup in terms of pass blocking this week per the LBM. So I also just want to say that the Loza Blocking Metric is a great starting place, right? It doesn't mean that it's a blanket solution. It means that, here's a discrepancy. Let's dig into this and talk about injuries and, number of weeks that this has occurred, et cetera. But I do think when you see Tua Tagovailoa going to Levi Stadium to face Stephania's 49ers, you're like, oh, wow, that's like a bit of a matchup for him because the 49ers defense has been absolutely fire. I will say, though, Tua is like a not tall king serving all of the I told you so vibes. Like he has recorded a hat trick in 3 of his last 5. The haters will say those were tomato cans. And that's not like an inaccurate statement, but this is going to be a test for Tua and Mike McDaniel, who's in a delicious revenge spot. I think that when we're noting the elite weapons that he has at his avail, he's probably a low-end QB1 in that QB 10 to 12 range because of the matchup. And let's be honest, this is a player that we're worried about getting sacked so much, and he's coming off of a 4-sack game, and obviously the 49ers know how to generate all the pressure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is a big thing that the 49ers are into, obviously, generating pressure on quarterbacks. In fact, in all facets of the defense, I still have Tua. You have him at 11. I have him at 9. I didn't realize that I love Tua so much this week and that you hate Tua so much this week, Liz. I had no idea. However, everything you're saying makes
I don't hate him. I
sense.
just called him a not tall king serving all the I told you so vibes.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay,
I didn't say short king, by the way, because he's cleared 6 feet. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Let's talk about Alvin Kamara taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have him as my running back 14, Liz, but Kamara has absolutely had some down weeks here the last couple weeks in a row. What does the Loza Blocking Metric have to say about him in this matchup?
He has the 9th worst matchup in terms of run blocking this week. But I ask you, Daniel, what is Alvin Kamara's superpower?
Catching passes.
That's right. So that's kind of where he bails you out. He's been really inefficient as a rusher on the season, not just the past few weeks. Let's be honest. He has a 3.9 true yards per carry rate. That's RB 48. And then, he's been buoying his fantasy stock via the passing game. He's managing a top 3 target share of over 20% and a top 2 route participation percentage of over 63%. He'll have that extra day to shake off the 2 fumble effort that I'm sure he'd like to forget from last Sunday. And here's where the Loza blocking metric is interesting, but also when we're looking at the matchup, we have to note the fact that Antoine Winfield Jr. exited the Bucs contest last week early. And the last time he missed time, weeks 8 and 9, earlier in the season, I looked back at how the opposition's rushing efficiency was. Now in week 8, that was the Kenyon Drake game where he ended as the RB20 for the week, depending on your scoring systems. The following week, week 9, was when Darrell Henderson, of all people, had a season high rushing total of 56 yards. It's 56 yards, that's super gross, but it's also the Rams. So and this is the key because obviously there's an extra day. If Antoine Winfield Jr. were to miss time, I think that you can maybe expect a tiny bump in Kamara's efficiency. Regardless, we know that he's going to see some work in the passing game.
Absolutely. And of course, with all that passing game work, regardless, even in the running game, they're going to try to give him the ball. We'll see how efficient and effective they can be against this Bucs defensive front. But I think I'm with you here, Liz, and it's a tough one because if you have Alvin Kamara, you likely can't not start him. He's too good, and where you're at, you've got to do that. But this is everything that you're saying leads up for a very tough matchup here, so maybe lowered expectations for Alvin Kamara here this week. Are we lowering expectations on Dameon Pierce as well? As much as I don't want this to be a negative thing, I feel like Dameon Pierce has been really tough sledding lately, and he gets another tough matchup, I think, this week.
Okay, well, first of all, I don't think we need to lower expectations any more than the last 2 weeks, right? Those are pretty abysmal showings.
Yes.
So I think our expectations have been lowered unless people are still living in some optimistic world about his past 2 performances, in which case, please tell me what you're eating for breakfast every day because I would love a spoonful of it.
Past 2 performances really quickly, Liz, just so that other people can know. Past 2 weeks.
Sure.
16 yards on 15 carries, 17 yards on 9 targets. That means what? 33 total yards over the last 2 games. Okay, that's Dameon Pierce.
3 fantasy points per week.
That's gross. Just gross.
It's been super gross, super gross. So there's an argument to be made that he's perhaps running out of gas. And when you look at his matchup, the Texans have the worst matchup in terms of run blocking this week. But we also know the game script is not going to go his way. That's certainly been an issue for much of the season for the Texans. They opened as 7-point underdogs against the Browns. I do think, though, there are moments in which the Browns are leaky versus the run, particularly on tackles between. Particularly in runs between the tackles. They've had trouble defending rushers who come up the middle. And Dameon Pierce is normally deployed that way. He's not much of an outside runner. He should be maybe because his, outside rush rate is frankly RB13, but he's not seeing those kind of totes. So I think you're going to assume there's going to be a little bit more efficiency for him. I have him projected to touch the ball maybe 16 to 18 times for around 70, 75-ish yards. So he's, a low-end RB2 for fantasy purposes.
Hopefully with a couple of receptions in there, maybe he falls into the end zone. Dameon Pierce can help salvage a decent fantasy day. Still the lead back, though, in that offense, and this is one of those things. He doesn't really have a lot of competition for carries, and so when you're looking at running backs that you're going to trust in fantasy and you're looking for volume, it's hard to be able to get away from Dameon Pierce in spite of how bad the last 2 weeks have been. Liz, let's talk about one more player here, and that's Garrett Wilson, who... For me, I have this Venn diagram or whatever, however you do this diagram thing. It's like, is Zach Wilson starting? If the answer is yes, then I bench Garrett Wilson. If it's not Zach Wilson, then I'm starting Garrett Wilson. Is that too antiquated? Is that too like binary to be able to say that's how I'm looking at my Garrett Wilson situation?
Listen, we are living in complicated times, so when you can find simplicity, lean into it, friend, here's what I will say about Garrett Wilson. I have regained my confidence in Garrett Wilson since Zach Wilson was benched. So I'm on the same page as you. Joe Flacco unlocked him at the top of the season, and Mike White just freed him from the shackles of fantasy mediocrity once again. We are loving all of it. The Vikings are obviously a great matchup. Minnesota has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. I have him in my wide receiver 20 range. Also, would you believe that assumedly as with Mike White as the starter, the Jets are just 3-point underdogs. So that makes me think there's going to be a good amount of back and forth, especially given the kind of pace that Minnesota plays at.
All right, Liz, we got a bunch of social questions because people want to hear specifically from you. They were like, Liz Loza is on today, Daniel. We don't really want you to answer these questions. We want Liz to answer all of our questions. So I'm going to throw these questions at you without Kyle Soppe here. First question comes from Tony Bertolini. D-Hop is on bye this week. I'm deciding between Christian Watson, Josh Palmer, and Garrett Wilson in PPR. What are your thoughts? We just talked about Garrett Wilson. Can I just say this? Like, I have Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 20. I think you do too. I like him out of all of the three here.
Yeah, I mean, especially if it's PPR, you want to think about volume. Christian Watson, I think, has only been catching like 4 receptions per week for the past 3 weeks, I believe. And while those have been big plays, it's not a voluminous play. Garrett Wilson is clearly the Jets' wide receiver 1. And again, the matchup is so stellar for him.
I am totally with you. Christian Watson has not had more than 4 receptions in any of the last 3 games that he has scored more than 20 fantasy points, and it's because he is catching long passes and getting in the end zone, and I would rather trust Garrett Wilson, I think, this week. All right, Brendan Thomas wants to know, who would you start at quarterback, Lamar, Dak, or Deshaun Watson?
So I have Lamar, who's facing Denver at home, and Deshaun Watson in his debut against Dameon Pierce's team, his former team, back-to-back in my rankings. I think I would lean Deshaun Watson because of the matchup. There might be, an argument for rust, but the schedule makers have made it intriguing enough that with the revenge factor, I'm not sure I'm worried about the 703 days that Watson will have missed. So I think I would probably, especially, if you're trying to get into the playoffs, like this is your moment to go big, right? Don't stay small right here. I think you've been holding on to Watson this long, you got to play him.
I feel if you have been holding on to him this long, then I can understand that feeling. I still think I would go with Lamar this week, and it's because of the fact that you just said 703 games since the last time that he played a football game. So like I realize that these guys, all NFL players, it's not like they forgot how to play football. But I do wonder, in this spot with where we're at, and it's tough because it's not like Lamar is just crushing it either. Lamar has been in a slump himself when you're asking this question. So it's a very fair question asking this. I just think that for me, I would rather still have Lamar Jackson and say, like, let this quarterback get 1 game in, knowing he hasn't played in the last 2 years before I start throwing him into my fantasy lineup. I think that's where I'm at. Oh, boy, that's tough, though. That's tough to go back and forth. That's a really close question, Brennan. It really is. Omar wants to know, Gus Edwards for Dallas Goedert. I'm pretty good on running back, and I have Freiermuth as my number 2, as my tight end, and I'm the number 2 seed for the playoffs. Would you trade Gus Edwards for Dallas Goedert?
I mean, on paper, that sounds great. Like, get rid of Gus Edwards. You're basically trading one banged up player for another banged up player. You're not going to see, I don't think Dallas Goedert is expected back until week 15, and he's dealing with the shoulder issue. Yeah, I mean, but Gus Edwards is in a timeshare, and who knows about like how much his knee is going to be able to handle given the trajectory of the year. So if you want a backup tight end behind Freiermuth, I think it's okay. And I guess like the injury for injury decision is a bit of a wash.
Yeah,
would you agree with that?
I think yes, and I think that you're looking at it the same way that I am. Like, it doesn't feel like a super strong trade, but if you want to make this deal to give you another player, I guess I would probably feel more if Dallas Goedert was healthy. I would have more confidence in starting Dallas Goedert in my fantasy lineup than I probably would Gus Edwards, understanding all the things, especially with J.K. Dobbins potentially on his way back. Like, this is a thing I'm not totally sure about.
Well, he's giving Edwards. And I think this is when like real football comes into play for your fantasy analysis, right? Because if J.K. Dobbins is potentially coming back and the Baltimore Ravens are eyeing the postseason, they might want to preserve Edwards and Dobbins as much as possible, right? And not really lean into running them too hard. Meanwhile, we know the Eagles are wanting to manage a postseason run. So I think there's probably excitement for Goddard's return. Like, you want to get him back as soon as possible. And because they're just such different positions, you know, with different roles in the offenses. So I think probably like I'd rather have a potentially hurt Dallas Goedert, an on the mend, I should say, Dallas Goedert over Gus Edwards where he is right now.
Assuming that the rest of your running backs are fine and it's not the only, like the last bit of running back depth that you have, I'm totally with that move. All right, Brian P. wants to know, a Pokemon sweater is fire, Liz. Who's your favorite Pokemon?
Charmander.
Charmander. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Is that because it's your favorite Pokemon, or is that your child's favorite Pokemon, and so it's also your favorite Pokemon?
No, it's because she breathes fire, baby.
All right. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. We got one more question. Austin Vo wants to know, who should I bench out of these guys? It's a little bit of a humble brag, Austin. Justin Jefferson, Chris Godwin, Jalen Waddle, or T. Higgins? Congratulations, you have a very good wide receiving court. I would bench.
No kidding, right? Well,
Jalen Waddle.
It's hard for me to say. I mean, imagine if Jamar Chase is back, then maybe. To me, if Marshawn Lattimore is back, then you want to start Godwin because you know that Lattimore is going to come back from injury to face off against his nemesis, Mike Evans, which should open things up for Godwin.
Yep.
Waddle's in a tough matchup, but he's Jalen Waddle. He's going to waddle his way all over the end zone, most likely. T. Higgins' volume could take a hit with the return of Jamar Chase, but he's been such a stud in the red area of the field. Regardless, it's hard to bench him. So I don't know. I guess
it's got to be Jalen Waddle.
I guess I'd probably say it's got to be Jalen Waddle for you. Yeah, I think that's the way I'm leaning just because of the matchup issue.
I have Godwin at 17 against San Francisco. Sorry, I have Waddle 17 against San Francisco. I have Chris Godwin at 16 taking on New Orleans. And as a part of this, maybe I'm reading into this too much, but Mike Evans and that Marshawn Lattimore shadow is legit. I expect Chris Godwin to be heavily used within this game. And so when I'm choosing between those two guys, it feels like Waddle, for all that he is and that is awesome, it's just like I'm choosing Chris Godwin. But hey,
there's also like Tyreek Hill, right, knows San Francisco pretty well, right? There have been some moments between those two. So I think he's going to be the receiver that could probably get the better of that secondary, which might leave Waddle a little out in the cold. And we've already talked about how it's not a good matchup for Tua and the passing game in general.
Liz, I'm going to put on my cheese head for Kyle Soppe here to close out the show because Kyle usually does cereal bets. That's how we do things. We bet a box of cereal. So what's the spread on this Bears-Packers game?
I don't know what the spread is. I haven't wanted to look because I don't know if Justin Fields is playing. Right. Actually, I just looked it up. So the over-under is 43.5. That's a barn burner. And the Packers are only 4-point favorites. But I imagine that's because Aaron Rodgers is like coming back to own the Bears again for like the 8th time in a row or I don't know, whatever the statistic is. I don't need to remember it. I am a little bit like, I kind of don't want Justin Fields to return. The Bears record is 3-9. Matt Eberflus has like purposefully and intentionally dismantled this defense, which has been great for fantasy matchups to teams opposing the defense. Mike White, perfect example. But I want the draft picks, right?
Yes.
To replace all of the big defensive players that we have gotten rid of or traded away. And so I kind of don't want Justin Fields to like get hurt. There's no real reason. I mean, I have him in fantasy in a bunch of places, so that's a bummer, but
Yeah, my best.
am I really supposed to make a bet with Kyle?
Yeah, yes,
If
you
I
have
win,
to.
do I get a box?
A box of cereal.
Do I get a box of Eberflakes? Can I have a box of frosted Eberflakes as my prize?
I'm sure we'll figure out a way to be able to make that work. You want to do straight up or you want to take the spread, Liz Loza?
Oh, okay. Asterisk. If Justin Fields plays, I will take the Bears to cover.
Okay.
How about that?
That's fair. So we'll have if Justin Fields doesn't play, then we'll say it's a moot point because the Green Bay Packers are going to beat them. How many points would I have to give you if Justin Fields doesn't play for you to say that you're going to make that bet? 10-point spread?
10 more.
10 more. So 14.
10 more points. I need double digits.
Yeah.
Also, like the Packers are getting healthy. They might even get Romeo Dobbs back this week. Eddie Jackson is out for the Bears. And meanwhile, like they're getting less healthy and the Packers are getting more healthy. It's a mess.
All right. If the Packers beat the Bears by more than 4 points, then you owe Kyle Soppe a box of cereal. That's how that works. And then the reverse is true. Kyle will send you a box of Eberflakes if the Bears beat the Packers or if they lose by less than 4. That's our cereal bet here for Fantasy Focus. That's how we like to have fun on this show.
Put it on the board.
Put it on the board. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us on a Wednesday. Realize this was a very long show, but we love being able to do this with you guys. For Liz, Field, and Stephania, and the rest of our crew behind the scenes, we love you guys. Don't forget to love each other. Please be kind to yourself. You earned that. We love you. We can't wait to see you tomorrow. We'll see you on the Thursday show.